Hello everyone, welcome to the next edition of the Care CEO Success Stories podcast. My name is Adam James of Spring Up PR, and today I'm delighted to say I have Helen Baxendale. She is a clinical director at Exemplar Healthcare. Exemplar Healthcare has 42 nursing homes across England, supporting adults with complex needs, 930 service users as of present, as of the moment. Now, Helen is going to be talking to us about how to deliver great outcomes. And this is great outcomes, not only clinical, but also social outcomes. Now, as I said from the top, Helen is responsible for 42 nursing homes. So this is going to be a much definite listen to episode, and I'm delighted that Helen's here. But before I get going, as I said, my name is Adam James of Spring Up PR, and two things. First of all, if you like this podcast, please make sure you share it and tell your colleagues. It's about an opportunity for the leading care CEOs in the UK to celebrate and showcase what they consider their single biggest achievement and what they would like to focus on. So there's a huge amount of learning and sharing of tips and insights from, as I say, the leading figures in the care sector in the UK. We have I think this is probably about our 15th episode, so make sure you're going to have a listen to our others on a huge variety of topics. So that's what I have to say about the podcast itself. And finally, just about myself, Adam James of Spring Up PR, and what we do. We help aspirational care providers become famous and get the recognition they deserve via PR and marketing, ultimately to help get more inquiries or recruit dream care teams. So if you head over to springup-pr.com, you'll find a whole number of videos and webinars on how to achieve exactly that. So without any further ado, as I say, welcome Helen to the podcast, and delighted to have you here. And why don't you start off by telling everyone a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Okay, thank you, Adam, and hello everyone. So my background is a registered nurse. So I left school at 17, went to a nursing school, not university, and did my 3 years nurse training. Then I stayed in the NHS for, it was a total of 6 years, but then moved out into social care. And I've worked in nursing homes and the nursing home environment ever since. I've done all of the roles in a care home, so from the nurse to the deputy manager to the home manager. And then I moved out into operational management within about 3 years of being in the care home sector. More latterly, sort of the biggest jobs and the most time that I'd worked for a company was for 10 years for Bupa, by which point I'd become an area manager and eventually went all the way up to being an ops director. And then in 2015 decided it was time to go back to my nursing clinical roots, and I became an advanced nurse practitioner in quality improvement, and I moved into governance type roles within Bupa. And then eventually 5 years ago, I joined Exemplar Healthcare as the clinical director, and I've been here since, and obviously moved into caring for people with complex needs, which was quite different and really eye-opening to myself, moving out of the elderly care sector.
Yeah, great.
That's really what I do.
Yeah, fabulous. So as I mentioned, from the top 42 care homes across Exemplar at the moment, nursing homes. Now, to get great outcomes, as you say, both clinically and socially, how do you do it?
Well, there's a question. So it's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because people often talk to me, being in a clinical type role, about clinical outcomes. And this was really a big part of my role when I worked in Bupa, and then I came over to Exemplar. And there are many things that we can track clinically. The type of people that we look after have multiple complexities, and that can be both from a mental health point of view and a physical health point of view. And certainly physically, we look at a number of clinical outcomes around infections, around wounds, that type of clinical disease process that you would see. And we track that and trend that. And we're also obviously also trying to ensure that if at all possible, that we do not have people admitted to hospital from a clinical perspective unless that is absolutely necessary, because certainly most of the people that we care for have some quite complex mental health issues, and actually that admission puts pressure both on the person that we look after, but also the hospital sector as well. So we're always very mindful of that, which is why we're always looking at clinical outcomes, and we're always looking at reducing as much as possible anything that can impact on a person's physical health, so that we can try as much as possible to keep them in their own home and care for them at home. But from a social aspect, and this is really, which I think we can see across the sector, and I think every care home group really tries to excel in this, is actually what is the individual goals that anybody that we look after in care really want to achieve. So the people that come and live with us generally come to us from multiple failed placements, and actually they're looking for their home and generally stay with us until the end of their life. So most people that come and live within an exemplar care home will stay there to the point that obviously, sadly, that they will die. So we talk to our service users around what is it that you want to achieve in life? And that can be many, many things, from the most simplest things where we've got someone that is really quite physically disabled. It could just be that they have the ability to communicate with their families on a daily basis, and that could be through some sort of assisted technology that we can use. Or it could be that somebody, for example, that's had a stroke has certain goals throughout the year that they'd like to achieve. And we have an awful lot of our service users that actually go on holiday and, with really quite complex needs, but actually there is always that goal that we would like to go and do what you would see as normal things that you would do in everyday life, and off they go. Very recently we had input from Leeds University, and we partnered with them looking at friendship and sexuality. So this was a big piece of work that I sort of came in and we undertook, about understanding people's both friendship needs, relationship building needs, and not necessarily needs around a sexual relationship, but how they would like to interact and have relationships within the care home and also with people outside the care home. And very interestingly, the big outcome of that whole project, and we worked with Leeds University and a researcher for about 6 months, was very much that the majority of people that took part, and what the research showed, was that everyone's got an aspiration to have a friend. Okay. So I think when we undertook that work, I think everybody thought it might be more about having a sexual relationship. Well, it wasn't. What the outcome was is that we need to drive that change in that behaviour about supporting our people to have a friendship. And it doesn't matter how many difficult complexities you've got that can impact on your ability to communicate or to actually get out of the care home and actually go and visit locally. That is really what people want. So that's a big piece of work we've undertook, and I think is really important to the whole sector, that just because you come to live in a care home, one of the goals is most people want to keep that friendship piece of work going on. And there's many, many, many others. It's things like accessing local community services, being able to go out on a bus, being able to go on a train. It depends on the person. It depends on their previous interests, ideas and goals, and actually what they then want to achieve when they come and live in a care home setting. We're quite lucky at Exemplar, and one of the ways that we manage to keep that communication amongst our 930 service users, who all have very differing ways and needs of being able to communicate, is we have a service user ambassador group. So each care home, so we have 42 service users ambassadors, and we bring them together every 4 weeks, more by technology, most recently following the pandemic, where we've introduced Zoom meetings and Zoom conferences. And actually that's allowed us to have far wider reach than we used to have when we used to bring everybody together every 3 months, a local care home. So we can listen to them and hear their voices, and they are the people that represent the other people that they live with in their care home, and they bring forward their ideas. They also talk about what outcomes people would like to achieve. They will ask us, and we get invited as board members and as part of the executive team to actually attend the meetings, and they will ask us questions around, can you support us to go on holiday? It's a big piece of work within our organisation. Is a lot of our service users have got an aspiration to go on holiday, and any other things that they think about. Is it that we need more therapy sessions within the services? So we've got lots and lots of ways of communicating, and our service user ambassador group is definitely one way that has absolutely allowed us to have that reach across the organisation.
Now, what I'm also very interested in is implementing having the processes in place where you have, as I said, 42 care homes. How can you ensure there is those consistent standards and ways of doing things and processes across a group of this size?
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? So when I worked in Bupa, there were 286 care homes, and there was a lot of transferable knowledge when I joined Exemplar about how you can effectively communicate through a real robust governance process across, that multi-site sort of group across the country, really. So it's around establishing a really, really robust but simple set of governance processes which capture anything really that can be risky and gives us an opportunity at various touch points through the day, through the week, through the month, to actually highlight issues, A, that can be positive, and B, that may not be positive, and that we can actually react really quickly to support people. So we have, over the last 5 years, really been in a period of digital transformation, and that is around how we can have real-time information at our fingertips from a central point of view and remotely, which helps us support the services really quickly, but also around how we can support our service users to also have access to digital processes. So if I give you a couple of examples of what we've done. So certainly from a mental health perspective, as part of our clinical team, we have a mental health nurse consultant, we have a learning disability nurse consultant, and we also have a consultant psychiatrist who supports Exemplar Healthcare on a monthly basis. And what we've devised through feedback from the service users, but also from the staff, and actually feedback as well from other healthcare professionals and families, is we now run a group of Zoom clinical sort of consultant process every single week and then every period. So if our teams, and these are open to families, to other healthcare professionals, these are open to our service users and obviously our staff, and sometimes we have to restrict who comes in depending on the topic and what the issues are. But very clearly, these are also about upskilling people and giving knowledge, and by using technology, we can do that much more quicker to support people. So for example, our behavioural support team hold a clinic every week, and that can be used A, by, as I've said, families, B, by service users, but generally staff as well, that they call in and they ask for advice. So if there's a particular issue or a particular service user that they need support with, they've got someone at the end of a Zoom call, like we have now, to actually advise and support and guide people on what actions to take, which again can improve outcomes really, really quickly. Yeah. So we schedule these types of calls, but it doesn't mean we can't do them more quickly. So if somebody was really in crisis, then we can do it immediately.
And can I just ask you, I'm curious here about how the structure of the organisation and how are you most effectively. Yes. So obviously you're a clinical director. How does it flow down from there on the clinical side and the outcome?
Yeah. Okay. So if I start with the care homes, so the care homes have their clinical teams. So we are nurse-led services, and so there is always a registered nurse on duty, generally more than one, depending on the size of the home, every day, 24 hours a day. Supporting that group of nurses, each home has a clinical nurse manager, and they are supernumerary to our nursing hours. So we interlink clinically very, very closely with the clinical nurse managers within the services, and they very much are an extended part of our clinical team. So we see them as an extension of the clinical team, and currently we have over 50 clinical nurse managers across our organisation. So those clinical nurse managers, they're the guys that are monitoring the clinical and all of the outcomes for the service users each week out on the ground and supporting the nurses. But likewise, when there's very much a point around upskilling and cascading training and information, and we link in very closely with them. And within the clinical team, we have a group of specialist nurses, that look at physical aspects of care, and B, that look at our mental health aspect of care. So I talked about our mental health nurse consultant and our learning disability nurse consultant. We also have a respiratory nurse that also works within the organisation, because we look after people that have complex respiratory needs, such as people on ventilators or people with tracheostomies. And then the rest of the clinical team take up link nurse roles. So we have a link nurse for end-of-life care, for example. And if I give an example of recently, one of our care homes had sadly a person at the end of life. They were struggling. So our link nurse, our person within the clinical team, then went into the service and supported the nurses in the service, act as a liaison with the local teams as well. So obviously there is support sort of networks locally within our other allied healthcare professionals, and that's how we work. So we're constantly reviewing any new service user that comes into Exemplar to Live. We have an absolute oversight of all of the conditions that we look after, and then we make sure that we've got clinical training available to support our services at home level through the CNMs in a cascade type of training to actually support the nurses and the care staff with the care of the people. So the two, although you'll find in any care home group, you have the central support service like us as a clinical team, and then you have the operations team. We're extremely interlinked here, which is why it works so well, and one is an extension of the other. Which actually drives some great outcomes for people.
Yeah, I see. And let's get a little bit techy if we can. The digital side and the softwares and instruments that you've brought on board here. Please share some names and what you feel has gone well.
Some ideas, yeah. Yeah, so we have the Power BI system, which is that gives us such oversight, not just about clinical information and clinical trends, but also around our operational world, staffing levels, etc., etc. So we use the Power BI tool, and that is basically Power BI.
All right, okay.
Power BI, yes. And that is very central to all of our reporting, as I've said, both clinically and operationally. We've very recently introduced Radar, which is an incident and complaint management, and that's the function at the moment that we're using that with. We have an electronic clinical governance system, which is around our daily, weekly, every month auditing system. We also have a health and safety system, which gathers all of the information around health and safety, our maintenance checks, and we've got EMAR. So we've really transformed, which is electronic medication administration, and we are at the process now and point of integrating them all, which is really good. And then the final piece of our jigsaw will be electronic care records, which we are going into pilot with a system called Nourish very shortly. And then systems like Radar and EMAR will actually integrate into that system. So having arrived at Exemplar 5 years ago, where everything was totally paper-based, to actually investing as we have done in all of these systems 5 years later, the amount of information that we've got at our fingertips, which helps us support in a very quick way with services where there may be a problem. But it also allows us to gather lots of data around lessons learned. So we're an organisation, and actually, we need to learn from incidents that occur, and actually having all of this information, the lessons learned process, and how we cascade that across the organisation, it's absolutely priceless, really, to ensure that we impact really positively on the outcomes for the people that we look after.
And tell me, in your experience as well, and you don't need to focus on generally, but like when things go wrong. Yeah, when things, when things are missed, when there is with the kind of clients or service users you're looking after, I can only imagine there are times when things just do not go right and they go wrong. And yeah, it's there's been a time where things, to be frank, have gone wrong and we mess up. So what happens then? How do you learn, or what do you take from it? Tell me about how, in your experience, you have to deal with these things. That truly.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, we can have every system, every process. You can have really good systems in place, but we look after people, which are not always predictable, and we have staff that occasionally are not predictable either. So you're absolutely right. On occasion, things can go wrong, and in my experience, having been in the care sector for all of these years, for me, it's around something's gone wrong. So it's around what action we take as quickly as possible to reduce risk of it happening somewhere else. So that's really key. And it's also around supporting the people involved. That is one of the most, if something's gone wrong in a care home, the impact that can have on everybody there, staff, service users, family members, it can be really quite upsetting. So it's around that immediate response. Having the systems that we've now got, that allows us to react a lot quicker than when we used to be paper-based and relied on people picking up the phone or sending messages. So you should always think about what lessons can be learned, because I don't care what goes wrong out of whatever you look at, and by doing root cause analysis, etc., you will always find something to learn from. And it's how we then quickly react to that. So within our organisation, we have a system that gets lessons learned out really quickly, through our internal communication channels. And we've got lots of those. So we have weekly communication channels, we have monthly communication channels. We've just very most recently introduced an intranet system whereby we can put in immediate lessons learned onto the intranet. And if necessary, when you think back to before COVID, most of our communication would be done via conference calls, would be done via communication emails. We can now get everybody on a group Zoom or Teams call very quickly. So we are immediately learning from and supporting people. I think you've got to drive that learning and improvement culture within an organisation. That is one of the key things to ensure that the outcomes for the people that we look after are as positive as we can make them, and as safe as we can make them.
And tell me a little more about this culture, because my job's cushy. I don't work in the field, so to speak, in caring for people. The idea that you are responsible effectively for the clinical outcomes of 930 people, but to me just sounds phenomenal, and I completely have my head off to anyone who does that. So that's the first thing I would say. But is it not like keeping you awake at night that something's going to go wrong? It's going to happen? And how do your team, and trusting them and building that, I can imagine a culture of openness where if things don't go quite right, it's disseminated and shared so people can learn from it. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, I think that there's something for me around, and having worked in larger organisations and worked in operations as well as in central services, as we call it, there is definitely something around that you have to, as much as possible, drive a culture of the teams working together. So you cannot have a central team versus an operational team, because that just doesn't work. So I think it's around joining up and having collaborative working relationships across the whole board at all levels. And we try to do that through our processes, through having joint business reviews, having joint quality reviews, etc. Our quality assurance committees that we have within the organisation there is always representation from every level. And that's down to clinical nurse managers join us, our home managers join us. And so it's around getting everyone involved and making sure that everybody at every level understands their responsibilities. Because by driving that culture, you're in a far greater place to ensure that if something goes wrong, somebody's going to tell you about it, and actually know that actually the outcome from that is that we're going to learn from it and make sure, and as much as possible, that it doesn't happen again. And you said something then around trust. There is definitely something that we have to trust each other. That's not always easy, but in actual fact, people do roles. They're part of the organisation. They have their part in the organisation, and we have to trust. And sometimes that trust is broken and it goes wrong, but that doesn't mean as a whole organisation that that's the culture you've got. So you've got to start accepting that. Having worked in care for forever, really, in my adult life, from being 17, if you can call yourself being adult at 17, but from being 17, things will go wrong. It's people's nature that sometimes they don't, for whatever reason, follow a procedure. More often than not, most people do not get up in the morning and come to work and think I'm going to do something wrong. Things happen and we have to reflect on that, and we have to accept that to a degree, and just try our absolute utmost through culture, through values, to drive an organisation to want to deliver outstanding care as a norm all of the time. And I think I do sleep at night because I have to trust people that are around me. And I think the fact once you've got an organisation to a point where you really have this integrated working, and that you have a joined up approach both from an operational team and the central services, then you are in a much better place than where people are working at loggerheads, because we all work together for the same organisation to ensure that the people that we look after have the best life, really. And I think once you've got your group to that, then actually you're in a much better place.
Great. Helen, this is absolutely fabulous, and thank you so much. Now, before we go, is there anything that you would like to mention that you feel you've not covered up to now?
No, I just think, when we reflect back on the last few years and the global pandemic, which obviously we're all moving sort of away from that now. But you know what? As an organisation, I think it was a real time for us of reflection. And actually, it gave us some great drivers for change. And I think, in any quality improvement type role, you're always looking at what's driving you to change. And for me, certainly from a technology point of view, the pandemic actually moved us on to be able to really get out there and know our service users a lot better, because they could become part of what we were doing all of the time from a technology point of view. And I think it's helped the care sector in one way. I know that sounds a bit like a double-edged sword, but at the end of the day, we all had to change for a reason that we never thought we'd ever have to change, because we were in a pandemic. And I do think that's supported us greatly. And it's definitely supported us as an organisation to actually really take stock and think about what we need to do to actually reduce risk and support people to achieve their outcomes that they want.
Right, Helen, thank you so much. And finally, if anyone wants to reach out to you, maybe have a question or something similar, where can they, how can they best contact you?
Yeah, best contact me through Exemplar Healthcare. If you want to pop onto our website, you'll get my details on there, and it gives my email address and contact details. Anytime anybody wants just a chat, any advice, any guidance, happy to share what we've been doing and support where possible, because we're all aiming for the same thing.
100%. Helen, thank you so much for being on the Care CEO.
Thank you.